My name's Jo Wilding and I'm a research fellow here at Brighton University. The project I'm working on is called In Whose Best Interests. It's about unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in the UK, France, Slovenia and Austria, funded by the European Union, and looking at the extent to which the children's best interests are taken into account while they're in Europe, as required under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Before I started this project, I was working as a practicing barrister at Garden Court Chambers in London, specialising in asylum and immigration. And in the course of that, I represented a lot of unaccompanied children. So that's how I became aware of the issue in the first place. Children migrate on their own for a whole variety of reasons, but this is particularly focused on those that come seeking asylum. They tend to travel across Europe with smugglers, and then really their destination is completely outside their control. They go where the smugglers choose to take them, and they often don't really know where they are when they arrive. But there are all sorts of child-specific forms of persecution. So they're targeted sometimes simply because they're children, or they could be targeted because of something their parents are involved with. It might be as simple as their ethnic group or their nationality. It might be to do with their religion. So children can be persecuted for the same reasons as adults, but they can also be targeted because they're children and therefore more vulnerable. We get a lot of young people coming from Afghanistan, as does really the whole of Europe, because there's such terrible disruption there. And children on the whole, if they don't have families to protect them, are at risk of persecution. And so a more distant relative will send them out of the country. Quite a lot of young people come from Albania, particularly boys, where you have this system of blood feud, and a family can be targeted over generations for something that's happened between two families. And as soon as the boys reach puberty, they're a target in the blood feud, so they get sent abroad for protection. There's also a lot of Vietnamese children, usually trafficked for cannabis cultivation or for work in nail bars or brothels. So children come from quite a range of countries, but what you find is that they get quite a cynical reception a lot of the time. They get their ages disputed, so they come in, they say, I'm 15, and either the Home Office or social services will say, well, we don't believe you're 15, we think you're 17. So then they get a much lesser level of care because they're over 16, or they come in saying they're 16 and their age assessed as being 18. And the evidence suggests that children experience that as a very hostile, very cynical way to be received when they first arrive. So it's a very difficult situation for a child to find themselves in. And the UK has no guardianship system, so they have this kind of bewildering array of professionals involved with them, and no one person that can kind of explain the entire system to them and guide them through it and make sure that everybody's aware of important dates in their case. The UK gets well over 1,000 unaccompanied children seeking asylum every year. So it's about 5% of all asylum seekers in the UK. And similar patterns are repeated, not necessarily the same numbers, but large numbers of unaccompanied children travelling across Europe on their own. So this is an issue for a lot of European countries. So I think the reason the European Union is interested in funding it is because they're trying, first of all, to harmonise asylum procedures across the European Union. And secondly, because we are all signatories to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, we do all have this obligation to treat the children's best interests as a primary consideration. And there are some concerns that that isn't happening everywhere or perhaps anywhere. So that, I think, is why it's such an important issue. Ideally, the outcome of this research would be an improvement across all the European countries in the way that unaccompanied children are received and the way that their cases are processed and the solutions that they come to at the end. There is a lot of resistance across Europe and beyond to making anything better or easier for asylum seekers generally, including child asylum seekers, for political reasons. So it will always be a struggle to get any improvement for unaccompanied children. My hope is that we can identify specific things which can be improved, which social services can put in place, which NGOs can put in place, and which we can, between us, pressure the government and the European Union as a whole to put in place. And in the UK particularly, a guardianship system seems to me absolutely crucial.